Namaste and in Lak'ech. Now, those are two ancient phrases. One means the divine in me recognizes the divine in you. The other one means I am another you. Aren't those some interesting perspectives that we can bring from the past into the current and work toward a future where we all recognize that possibility with each other? Thanks for tuning in to One World in a New World. I'm Zen Benefiel, your host, and today's guest is Michelle Holliday. She's an author, speaker, a researcher, and her book, the Thrivability, gosh, I just forgot the name of it off the top of my head. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to bring Michelle in, and we're going to have an amazing conversation, I'm sure. Then you'll enjoy it. Michelle, thanks for joining me today and sharing your wit and wisdom with the world.
Thank you, Zen. It's wonderful to be with you.
Well, you know, we were talking about how we interact with reality and the challenge that folks generally have in harmonizing, blending, integrating, however you want to term it, two kinds of reality, the inner and the outer, and they're both kind of they coexist in our efforts to find our perfected form, fit, and function in the world, if you will. So could you describe kind of how you got started with this idea of thrivability and how it advances beyond sustainability, and how those worlds kind of interacted in your own process?
Yes, thank you for the great question.
You're welcome.
So it really did start with my inner world, and in fact, my innards, to be specific. I worked for two big multinational companies, H.J. Heinz and then Coca-Cola, in brand strategy internationally, and it should have been wonderful. Really highly respected companies and interesting work, big budget, big splash. I worked in Russia. So we were making a visible difference. And yet my innards, I had chronic abdominal pain that felt like it was killing me, and doctors couldn't figure out what was going on. And I had the sense that it was my conscience speaking to me, actually. And
well, so you're familiar with the three brain?
Yes. In fact, I have a chapter in my book about it. Yeah. So what was not sitting well with my conscience was the way, in particular, Coca-Cola engaged with customers and community. It seemed just manipulative and superficial and extractive. I don't drink soft drinks, and so I think they're bad for you. So, you know, there was that conflict.
And that's a slight conflict.
Right,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand why the corporate culture internally was the way it was, fiercely competitive. And I kept saying, kind of, why are we operating this way? But everyone else seemed to think that was the way things had to be. So I left.
Status quo, right?
Exactly. I left marketing, went into employee engagement and organizational development, and my stomach hurt less, but my conscience was still noticing the inconsistencies and in fact, the consistency of how organizational leaders engaged with their employees. And it was, again, superficial and manipulative. And so that
kind of a command and control patriarchal type of system.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to change anything, but tell me what buttons I can push to get those people to work more for the same amount of money.
Right. Never considering that happy people get more done with less supervision and will exceed your expectations.
Right. And that happiness might come from more than a $50 bonus or something.
Yeah, money never seems to be the real issue. It's how they're appreciated.
Right. So those observations, together with the third observation that we seem to be screwing up the planet. You know, this was in the 90s when sustainability started to become a mainstream concept. And I could see that we were becoming more aware of our impact on the planet, but we weren't able to imagine other ways of being. And that's what helped me imagine that it might be the story, the logic that guides our choices, decisions, our actions. It might be that story that's the problem, and maybe there's a bigger story, a more complete story.
Sure, and logic streams can be manipulated with words and phrases and stories that seem to make sense at a cursory level. The deeper reality of it is it just doesn't feel right.
Right. This is why I love your question about the inner journey and the inner experience, because that seems to be where we notice that what seems so logical on the surface isn't really. It actually isn't what's needed. It isn't all that's possible, but it's only in our inner experience that we start to get that little niggling.
Absolutely. And now for our viewers, that I mentioned the three brain philosophy earlier. It's an indigenous philosophy, and the three brains being the gut, the heart, and the head. And that most of us process from the head, and we forget about the rest of the body. You know, and our bodies are instruments. We just don't know how to tune them or play them yet. Well, their philosophy is you start with the gut, everything, which is, and it's related to quantum physics now, right? Everything's vibration. You feel it in your gut first, and then you mull it over in your heart, and then the brain has the opportunity to make better decisions and choices of what to do with it.
Exactly, and there are actual neural pathways in the heart, surrounding the heart, and in the gut. So it's not a metaphor; it's literal.
Right. And it's funny how, things that, and the indigenous folks didn't have the kind of technology we have now to identify all those things. And yet now that we have the science to do so, it's proving the old ways.
Right. Exactly.
So continue with how you were evolving in this place.
So if I continue with my inner journey,
right.
I had an opportunity to do independent research for at least a year and a half. There was a concentrated period of a year and a half. My husband got transferred to Paris. I wasn't allowed to work while I was there. I didn't have a work permit. That was sort of heavenly, to be forced to be a lady of leisure in Paris. But I thought, I want to use this opportunity to figure out, how did we get this story that tells us we're separate from each other, from our organizations, from nature, that we exist to compete and consume? Who thought that was a good idea? And why does that persist? And what do I mean by the human spirit when I talk about that, in my work in organizational development, and why doesn't it land? But what if there's life in addition to this mechanistic story? So I spent that year and a half studying biology and every other discipline. I just followed my curiosity. It was looking for common themes and threads, and I found them, as many have, and went out eagerly into the world. They're in Paris at first, saying, "Guys, look, there's life." And
hey, look at what I found.
Right. And the world that was 2001 went, that's not right. That's not it. So that's where the inner journey took another turn, and it's taken so much courage over these years, and so many dips and peaks and valleys, So
let's talk about that for just a moment, because fear is often framed as false evidence appearing real, right? But at the same time, we have to, when we're sharing our insights and our heartfelt and the depth of our being with others, and then we have this rejection or dismissal that comes from the outer world, it creates sometimes a reticence, and sometimes it deepens the courage to reach out. So how did you deal with those things that came up for you, and what did you see in that, and how did you work through it?
So a lot of it is stubbornness. It's just basic stubbornness.
Right.
And a little bit of perfectionism that I think has pros and cons to it. I kept going back into the research. Whenever I would come out into the world and hit some kind of a rejection, I would look for what's behind the rejection and try to fill in that gap, fill in the blanks.
Sure.
Whatever crack they found in my story that I was presenting.
Right.
So,
which was really a good thing, because it gave you the opportunity to do a little more, research and find those things that would that you could plug in then to fill
Exactly.
those gaps. And if we don't have that, then right, because this is, we often really get frustrated and don't accept that for the real gift it is.
Right, exactly. Those are the pros. The cons are reticence, as you said, holding back and being fearful. And I've been at this for 20 years, and now that the world is catching up, I find that I have to remind myself that I don't have to be afraid, that I can wholeheartedly and openly share what I have to share. And there's some chance people will be open to it,
Oh, absolutely. I find, and I've taken a lot of different views from things from a cosmic standpoint of timeframes and calendars and all that kind of stuff to the real practical, pragmatic, and the observation of what's in process. And a good friend of mine was Jose Arguelles. You're probably familiar with the name. He brought out the Mayan calendar to the Western world. Well, he and I had a conversation one time about this process, and that we're basically in a window between ages, the Piscean and the Aquarian. Now that sounds kind of woo-woo, but it really isn't when you get to looking at the science of it and the process. And what he suggested is that in this waxing of the process and coming up to the tipping point of the winter solstice in 2012, that there was an increase in awareness and consciousness and the desire to self-explore. And once these opportunities transpired and information and intelligence, knowledge was gained, and then what do we do with that, right? Well, we implement that back into our lives and in the existing systems, and they're ripe to do so now because we need a change.
Right, exactly. And you mentioned science. This was a big part of my response to the fear and some of the reactions I got. I find that science can be a useful bridge because the mechanistic story is very comfortable with science. So I looked to the science of biology and other forms of understanding the natural world to make the case that there is also life and that we can design according to the fertile conditions that life requires.
And we can co-create with it. I think Bruce Limpton's been into that for decades.
Yeah, exactly. And it's accessible and relatively simple. There are some universal design principles that we can work with, and it doesn't mean that it's a quick fix and it's easy. It still requires real transformation on our part. But
well, it's probably one of the toughest challenges that we have in stilling our belief systems that haven't worked and being open to something new, such as the discovery of this internal design by nature that we have, that we've often dismissed.
Exactly.
And the science is proving that. Even there's a Russian video, speaking of Russia, and my wife's from St. Petersburg, by the way. She shared a video with me from a Russian academician named Marinova, I think. It had English subtitles, fortunately, but it was a dissertation about the recent scientific studies that prove our capacity to biospiritually, if you will, evolve. And how it's working to where we actually are co-creators.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Right. So I use this word thrivability, and I'm not the only one. It's one of those things.
It just kind of pops up in the thought-mosphere. When something's ready to appear, it just kind of plops into a bunch of people simultaneously, and they all start using it.
Fascinating. Right? It's fascinating and affirming and exciting. So my definition of it is the informed intention and practice of enabling life to thrive for individuals, for organizations as living ecosystems, for communities, for the biosphere. So informed, we start with informed because if we're going to create the conditions for life to thrive, we have to know, what does that mean? We have to have some idea of what that involves.
We have to have the intelligence to understand it.
Yes, exactly. Then we have to set that as our intention, and it's not our intention now. to enable life to thrive. We set our sights on something far less than that, and we're getting something catastrophically less than life's
Right.
ability to thrive. And then finally, the practice, informed intention and practice, that it's a life practice.
Absolutely.
And an individual and collective life practice as well. Yeah.
Yeah, because no man is an island to himself, right?
Right.
It's a cooperative. It doesn't matter what the product, the service, or anything like that we have. It's people that make it happen. I've truncated that, what you're talking about, into 3 words: attention, intention, and interaction.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Very good. I like that. I see how that is another way of saying what I said.
Same thing. Yeah, absolutely. And as you're finding, it's the ability we have to articulate what we know so that it's understood. And stories are a great way to do that now, because we can provide the metaphors and the analogies and the similes and all the kinds of things that imbue the story so that people can really grok the meaning, to use a Heinlein term.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So there's science, there's indigenous wisdom, there's stories, there's meditation. There are all kinds of ways to tune in to what life requires and be guided in our practice of stewarding life, really.
Now, in the sharing of this within organizations and the work that you do, what do you find is the response, the process of the response? Because I'm sure that there's a pattern, there's a sequence, there's levels of activity as far as the integration of it, and then how it's displayed in the organization or the people in the group. How do you see that unfolding, and what are the signs and symptoms of release into this new understanding?
Yeah. Well, if I look at the trajectory of these past 20 years in my work, I started out sort of with a Trojan horse strategy, offering marketing services or employee engagement. And I would bring in these living systems principles as a way to support that work. And gradually,
the skill sets to do it from
Right.
your past effort, which give me just another moment that I want to identify that, yes, it's not something that we are necessarily have to completely change in our life, right? Our life's been a progression. We've accessed and gained the knowledge and skills and attitude, aptitude and skill set. And it's just applying it in a slightly different way now.
Right. And with a bigger context and,
Right.
and bigger intention.
Absolutely.
Right. So gradually, I found more client organizations who were ready for the bigger picture, recognizing that how they engage with customers, how they engage with employees was part of that, but that there was a bigger story. And eventually I also started to see that this shift that's needed is bigger than any one company can really accomplish, and it takes more courage. And so I started to work across sectors more often. So with groups of farmers or with groups of regional and national tourism authorities, to have conversations about how do we shift this whole sector, including the individual entities and organizations. But I'm finding that feeds my soul more. That's more the level of work that I'm passionate about, and it supports and guides each of the individual entities that are involved better as well.
So how have you seen the progression of that as far as the reflection of those organizations today and how they've progressed in that?
I've noticed in the past 3 or 4 years a real opening and interest and a shift in the conversation, and that has absolutely taken off in the past year. So as much as the pandemic has been tragic and terrible in so many ways, it's also been transformative.
Right. That's kind of what Robert Gilman says. He says that it's an accelerator for change, right? That it forces us into something new.
Exactly. It's given us this global experience, shared experience. It's forced us to see our interdependence with each other, with all life. It's forced us to pause and think about what really matters, and helped us recognize that we don't really want to go back, most of us, many of us, to the way it was before.
Right. At the beginning of, I guess it was March of 20, I had a conversation with Luba, my wife, and I said to her, you know, and this was regarding the obsession on self-hygiene and sequestration, right? That it's a behavior mod program, and psychologically, right? So eventually that obsession on self-hygiene turns inward. And my hopes were that it would get people to begin to do exactly what you're talking about, to question, hey, where am I? Who am I? What do I believe in? What's important to me? And how can I share that? How can I change my life to align with something that works better for me and those that I associate with?
Exactly. I loved seeing how much mutual aid emerged. We were sequestered in our homes and in our neighborhoods, and the urge, the natural human tendency to care for each other came out, and
it became virtual.
Good. And it became virtual, right. Yeah. So we started to see that we're not the selfish beings that we've been taught that we are.
Right.
Yeah.
So did you see we were talking about the inner, right? And then the stories, do you see this kind of emergence in the conversations where people are starting to talk more about how they feel, not what they think? How's that? How do you notice that? What kinds of things are you seeing in the reflections from others as to how that's evolving in them?
I see that shift everywhere, that we're able to have much deeper conversations, more multifaceted, not only the analytical and impersonal, that people bring their whole selves. I'm thinking about a 10-week course, a facilitated learning journey with some colleagues that we offered across New Zealand. 150 people were signed up for this course.
That's a great number according to Gore.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So just the depth of conversation, and including delving into implications of colonization and what's needed now, and exploring how ancient ways can be brought back to the forefront and given the respect that they deserve. So these are tough and important conversations, and
Absolutely.
a readiness to have them.
Sure.
In fact, there's one story. There was a young woman who participated in this program, and she shared that she had just returned to New Zealand after being away for 12 years, and she's Maori, so she's a local indigenous in New Zealand. And she said, when I left those 12 years ago, it was shameful to be Maori. It wasn't something to be admired. And she said, it's taking me some time to get used to things now that I'm back, and suddenly it's something respected and honored. She said, it's
Isn't it amazing that, traditionally educated people have had a really severe disrespect for the ancient wisdom and for those, indigenous tribes and people, and here in the United States, we almost wiped out a whole culture, and really have, under the guise of progress. Right. And it's more, it's been just the opposite.
Right.
And that effect has caused our pollution of earth, air, and water. And now we're at this place where we're doing a great reset, and it's on the way to, as people are waking up, there's been this great awakening that has been foretold across many ancient paths and cultures and religions and all this kind of stuff, to where, even the apocalypse, right? And we misunderstand that as some kind of catastrophic event. But no, that means uncovering. Well, what are we uncovering? Intelligent design that we have within us that connects to everything.
That's right.
So in this journey that you're having, right?
Mm.
How do you see the big vision? How do you see it unfolding, and what kind of evidence do you see? And you stated some, but are there some specific examples that you can offer that demonstrate what we've been talking about?
One thing that gives me a lot of hope is that this transformation is taking place across all sectors, and there are common themes and common threads. So in agriculture, farmers and scientists are starting to recognize that it's not the farmer that makes the plants grow with their chemicals and heavy equipment. It's the living soil, and that we are stewards, right, and we can create the fertile conditions, and that's called regenerative agriculture. And
we used to call it having dominion over the earth, right? This what we were having, we misunderstood the meaning. It meant stewardship. It didn't mean command and control and rape and pillage, right?
Exactly. So that the parallel reconnection with life and the role of stewardship is emerging in tourism as well. So there, the conversation that I'm part of is shifting from phrases like managing the tourism destination to cultivating the hosting community, and that's much more a stance of stewardship of what's alive in this community, including people, but also the more than human world within that community.
There are many worlds. We just don't, really have a way of understanding them yet. Even in quantum physics, there's a couple of guys, Vernon Nepian and Edward Close, that put together a model, quantum physics, of course. They call it the triadic dimensional distinction vortical paradigm. Wow. And what they state is that consciousness, space, and time are tethered across 9 dimensions in the physical reality. That doesn't exclude other dimensions, right? Wow. And I've also found a reflection of that in another process that was discovered in 1950s by William Swigart, and it was called the multiplane awareness technique. And it too had 9 planes that we, according to his model, right, that we have a body on each one of those planes that we're unaware of. Now, of course, this is a really, we think, dense physical body, even though it's 99% space, right? But on those other levels, there are finer and finer presences of consciousness, if you will, that's all integrated. And I use the term, we all, or use the phrase that we all have a point of light within us that's still connected to the great light from which we go back and forth. So it's being able to kind of recognize that and have a different view, which helps to change the language. And the words that we use now are imperative, because it totally shifts the mindset.
Yeah. I put a lot of emphasis on shifting our language, on first tuning in and becoming aware of the language that we use. I spoke to the group where you and I spoke last, and there was a question about metaphor, and how did I develop this talent for coming up with handy metaphors, and my answer was, we swim in metaphor.
We do.
There, I just used one. I'm not actually swimming, right? But so it's becoming aware of them, and when they come from the world of physics and force, which is most of the time for Western society, and then experimenting with substituting organic concepts and seeing what new possibilities are revealed with that switch.
Do you find that, and this just occurred to me, that a lot of this Westernization is really the Northern Hemisphere.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So maybe we need to shift that to, the Northern Hemisphere mindset is completely different than the Southern Hemisphere. And of course, the Mayans say that we're in a time where the condor and the eagle, come together and they unite. Hopis say that we're in the 5th or 4th world moving into the 5th world, and the Mayans say we're in the 5th world moving into the 6th world. So there's this, maybe they're a little ahead of us, right?
Yeah.
In that sense that they're more aligned and in tune with the indigenous ways that haven't been lost in their cultures.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the dominant society, the first world, right, hasn't totally infected their world
Yes.
with ideas and processes that, even though we're trying now with the destruction of the rainforest and trying to get oil and cattle and all that kind of stuff, these are just practices that, you know, if you think about Mother Earth, they're abhorrent.
Yeah. I have a theory that I write about in the book, and I've got a slideshow that summarizes it, that describes the eras of humanity and how we have followed these universal design principles of life, but as a species. And that in the hunter-gatherer era and in hunter-gatherer societies, there's a consciousness of wholeness. And that's one of the fertile conditions that we have to cultivate for any living system to thrive, that there's enough coherence and convergence at the level of the whole system. And then in the agricultural era, we honed in on the consciousness of relationship, right? We can be in relationship with the land and with the animals and recognize the seasons. And both of these are fundamentally indigenous ways of being with the world. And then in the modern era, starting in ancient Greece, and it kind of fell away during the Dark Ages, but reemerged in the Renaissance and came back with a vengeance in the industrial era. And now it was a consciousness of separation, of divergence rather than convergence. And this is also part of life's universal design principles, that there are distinct parts. They're not fully separate, but there is distinction.
Right, they're contiguous, right? And so we move through this, and as a planetary civilization, I'll term it in that frame, because it takes thousands of years, right? And we go through these phases.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, you know, we're coming out of the industrial phase, we're into the technology stage, which includes both physical and psychospiritual technologies. And so we're learning how to blend those and be a little more effective. And, you know, because the existing systems are there. We have the mechanisms to do everything that we need. We just don't have the proper leadership and thinking in them yet.
So another word for blending is integration. And just one more thought about that era of divergence, separation. My hope is that in focusing on the experiment of what happens when we really dial that consciousness up to the hilt, as white Europeans have in their experience of the world, there has been some benefit, and we've also proven how much harm that causes. And so it gives me some hope that we haven't been only a virus on the planet, that there has been some value in both proving that there's some benefit and also proving the harm, so that we can together as humanity move into an era of integration, of wholeness and relationship and divergence and separateness, and into an age of thrivability.
Right. And it seems to me that is kind of it's an exploration and further integration, if you will, of the Gaia principle. Right? There's this whole thing about consciousness, and we don't, you know, we use the term kind of like oneness, right? It's a nebulous term that, you know, we all have different understandings of it. And yet one of the things, there was a guy from Canada, his name was Wilbert Smith, and his memoirs were put into a book called The New Science. Now, and it came about in kind of a obscure way. He was Canada's chief UFO investigator in the 1950s, and the program was funded by the Canadian Department of Transportation, right? So he had actually had some interactions with what he called people from elsewhere. And two things I'd like to share that they shared with him. One, that our idea of time is misconstrued. Time to them is the measurement of the change of entropy. Right? So when you consider that less entropy, truncated time in order to move through those things that we need to do, right? Because it's more in harmony with the natural design that we have. Now, the other thing that they said to him was that, you know, if you have questions, shut up. Well, that's the second thing, basically, but ask Mother Earth.
Yes.
And then shut up.
Right.
Right. And your life experience will provide those answers.
Yeah.
Kind of like Rilke says in one of his quotes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You live with the question, and it eventually, you know, your life unfolds the answer.
Right. I'm speaking to a group of entrepreneurs tomorrow. They're graduating from this incubator. And then I have another new business model conference next week. So I've been thinking about what's the message, you know, that I want to share with them. What is the Thrivable Startup? And part of what I intend to say is the starting point has to be tuning into life's wisdom. Don't start with the problem and your solution. Tune into life's wisdom. Ask bigger questions. Ask what's the wisdom that's needed? What's the healing that's needed? Embed yourself in relationship and in community so that your solution, your offering, and your understanding of what's needed will come from that larger, fertile ground and from a deeper understanding of the complexity that's always
It's
there.
kind of the question, what do we all want to experience together?
Yes, that's the second part of it. So there's this kind of journey through life's universal design principles. And then in all of it, the goal is to create a practice ground for a more thrivable world. Your widget is an excuse and a means, but any enterprise has to have as its core intention to create a practice ground for a more thrivable world.
And because of the capitalist society we live in, there has to be some mechanism that provides benefit in that realm, which is not a bad thing.
No.
Right.
No.
But we oftentimes it's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, which a lot of folks do. Right. They just toss everything aside, but they don't look at, okay, what are the seeds or the pebbles or the essence of the wisdom that's still inside of this organism that we can bring into ourselves and move forward with and allow that to evolve in a new way.
And it's not even only because we exist in a capitalist system, but there is the issue of viability. Is this going to be able to remain alive and support life? And flow of resources is part of an entity and an organism's viability. So the flow of money is welcome, and other
until we don't need that
flow as well. Right. Exactly.
Right, because as a planetary civilization evolves, there comes a time, it would seem, in this natural universal principle, rollout, that no longer is necessary, that we have the resources, we have the mechanisms, we have the distribution systems, ways, means, if you will, to provide the basics that everyone needs, and it gives us the opportunity to become a much more not just intellectual, but an explorative, of self and others, and whatever else is available.
Right.
And the industrial age has given us a little bit of freedom to do that, but then we've got caught into the 40-hour or 55 or 80-hour work weeks, right? Dual income families, latchkey kids, and the degradation of the family unit as a result of that. That's changing now, and especially with this last year or so, the family units had an opportunity to become tight again.
It's so true. That's been my experience, and I feel bashful to admit it because so many people have suffered. But
unfortunately,
it's so wonderful for my family. It's been so wonderful to be together, and I know that we are wildly privileged in that respect. But yeah. it hasn't been that for everyone. I wanted to build on something you were saying about
Sure.
no longer needing money. And people often talk about that as the gift economy. I wrote a relatively long piece about that, that it's not enough just to share or offer things for free. There's a consciousness that underlies it. It's sort of getting in tune with our inner caveman, you know, the hunter-gatherer consciousness of wholeness, and the agricultural era consciousness of relationship. If we don't also cultivate those in ourselves, then it's still stuck in a mindset of exchange and transaction and
Right.
counting. So there's a bigger shift that's needed to bring that about, as you know.
Do you also see that, you know, in the division of labor, right, that the jobs might shift a little bit because of the needs, but for the most part, things aren't going to really change all that much for the individual. It's just the attitude of which they have toward what they do and how it supports the whole, rather than just bringing home a paycheck so that they can play, right? There's a shift.
I do think there are meaningful changes. I think if we shift towards seeing the objective of our work as this practice ground for becoming a more complete human and a more thrivable world, we're going to have different conversations, bigger, more courageous conversations. We'll choose not to do things that now we wouldn't think twice about. We'll choose not to launch an enterprise. As part of this new business model conference, one of the speakers was saying her organization supports entrepreneurs of all kinds, standard entrepreneurs, she said, and not social entrepreneurs. And her organization's contribution is to help them add in some sustainability, if possible, as long as it doesn't compromise their profitability.
Right. Well, we can't make a sweeping change in everything, right? It's
Maybe
incremental.
not. Maybe at the same time, it's so absurd that we should offer social license to a company that can't demonstrate it's not harming life's ability to thrive. You know, that's a fringe thing still. She was very clear. No, they're standard entrepreneurs, not the ones that are committed to serving life's ability to thrive.
Now, speaking of standards, that brings up the notion of the ISO 26000 social responsibility standards. Right? You're familiar with those, I'm sure?
No.
Wow. So this is a document that was put together, was ratified by 92 representatives from 92 countries in 2010. And I know you're familiar with the ISO, International Standards Organization, or International Organization of Standards, but they call it the ISO. So they have the ISO 9000, which are quality standards for aerospace and military and all those, that kind of production, right? Manufacturing. So the ISO 26000 social responsibility standards are actually, and you get a copy of them at planetarycitizens.net, by the way. They focus on the intention of doing good. And so an organization can't get certified, but it does give the rank and file the opportunity to introduce these new philosophies into the organization as an intention and as a way to acquiesce to this new way of doing things. And so far, you know, like I would have thought that you would have known about them. So this is kind of one of those things. It's a document. We always look for things. Okay, what's the practical? Do we have anything, you know, present that we could notice, that we could reference, and things like that that can be used ubiquitously, right? Well, this is one of those documents, and the fact that it was ratified by 92 countries.
And more than 10 years ago. That's good.
Yes. So, you know, it's kind of like Howard Gardner's work with the multiple intelligences in 1982. They came out. Schools still don't use them. Right.
But it's coming. And I think these things have a ripple effect, you know, whether we can trace them or not. People are changed, and they carry that forward into the world.
Well, that ripple effect, again, a metaphor, right? it's been my experience, and I haven't really had a lot of chance to reflect with others about this, and maybe this is an opportunity. When you have a conversation with another, those vibrations permeate the thoughtmosphere. They're just available, right? Because energy flows. There's no degradation of it. And so those seeds are there so that when another has at least a moment of contemplation where they're opening themselves to other things, that then those thoughts, it's kind of like a reservoir, right? You got your finger in the dike, you pull it out for a little bit, get a drink. Does that make sense to you from your experience and what you've seen happen around you?
Yeah, and not only my experience in some of my early research, the theory backed by some experiments that the brain is more of a radio receiver, that we're tuning into collective consciousness, and presumably there's some frequency that is dedicated to us, in our memories. But
well, as you mentioned, it's not just the brain, it's the body. This is a transceiver.
Right.
And as we tune into that, the neurocircuitry, or now what's it called, neuroplasticity, right? That this awareness isn't just in our brains. We feel it. The phrase that came out of my mouth about a year ago is, we can't think our way through a system built on vibration. We have to feel our way through it,
nice.
right? Which is a slightly different notion. And yet the science that we have now is backing that up.
Right, exactly. And
No,
that's
go ahead.
Just that starting point for the entrepreneurs, that the starting point is tuning in, opening up the channel so that you can have access to more wisdom than your little brain is capable of. It's available and it's necessary if we're going to address the scale of challenges and opportunities that we face.
Well, to go back to that notion of bouncing back and forth between the great light and the point of light, right? That information it's always there. I had an NDE as a teenager, and it started with a prayer to know truth, and I was willing to die for it. Truth to me was the ability to understand reality and my form, fit, and function in it. So the following week, this voice that I'd known since I was a kid, and I think many of us have them, we just don't pay attention to them, right? So it asked me by name if I was willing to die for what I believed in. And I had, I call it a butt pucker moment, where I just, completely, it's like, well, okay, what do I believe in? My first thought was Christ consciousness. Felt empty, didn't analyze it, just dismissed it. Second thought was cosmic consciousness. Felt full. I said yes. Now, I was listening to Journey's first album, and Neil Schon does a guitar riff that sounds like a rocket ship taking off, that happened instantly after I answered that question. And so I left my body, and I'm laying across my dorm room bed. It was in a pre-med program at Ball State University, 1975. And I look at my body laying across my bed. I turn back to look where I'm going. And before I can get turned around, I'm completely engulfed by white light. And it's the most amazing, really high-pitched, iridescent, effervescent sensation, right? I had no body at that time, though I could still think, so I knew I wasn't dead because I was analyzing the environment that I was in. And then as an impetuous teenager, I got tired, and I said, wow, is there more? Right? And I felt a slight movement, and I find myself in an indigo background with pinpoints of light surrounding me. The first question is, what are they, right? And I got this immediate intuitive response that they're points of consciousness, whether in body or not. I wasn't sure because I knew I wasn't. And then the voice picks back up again and says, these are those that you're to work with in order to facilitate a new world order. It will happen in your lifetime. Know this to be true. Your path will be full of trials and tribulations. What an understatement. Trust, or have faith and trust that everything that you need will be there at its appointed time. Trust and allow. And then I felt another rush of energy, and I'm back in my body taking a gulp of air. Well, the essence that I got from that is that we are cosmic consciousness condensed into form. Right? And we're still connected to that cosmic consciousness. We just don't know how to access it. And the funny thing is, it's not a forced thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's that aspect of learning how to be still.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Right? And the voice of being speaks from there. Well, that's the voice of being, right?
Yeah.
It is from that place. It's you,
Right.
in some way, shape, or form.
Exactly. That's an amazing story. The closest.
Trust me, it wasn't very well accepted when it, as I started talking about it early on, because I was this 18-year-old that sounded like he was on drugs.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I get that now.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It was frustrating then. And I just recently decided, it's time to start talking about this because of the time we're in. And it was an experience I had, and nobody's going to take that away from me.
Good for you. I like to talk to trees, when I'm walking through the forest, and it's not verbal, it's in my head, and I just walk through and I ask the trees a question, and an answer pops into my head, and it feels to me like
Connected.
It's connected, and it's beyond what I'm capable of. That's my experience. And I also always have a magic journal, and it can be any journal. The magic is in asking a question, and then an answer flows, and I'm writing it. But
right. And the more you practice it, the better it gets.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's another thing that the people from elsewhere told Wilbert, was that their preferred method of communication is telepathy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so that's in the silence. You're not speaking the words, you're thinking, and you're communicating from that level. And, we do that,
Mm-hmm.
right? We have those moments. We don't know how to perfect that practice yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yet, there's those things. There's some people who have experiences with bilocation, even teleportation, that, just instantly can't figure out how to repeat it. Mm-hmm. But it's an instant where, okay, now I know that's possible. Mm-hmm. So it opens up the rest of your being to additional possibilities that now can come through because you've had that experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's fascinating.
Kind of bizarre.
Mm-hmm.
So, and beautiful at the same time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It just inspires the awe of creation that, it's there. It's so much more than we ever dreamed or imagined it could be, because we're living it.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So speaking of living it, go ahead. Yeah.
The last thing to add to that is play and beauty seem to be pathways to fuller wisdom and insight also. And those are things that the mechanistic story rejects. But I find this spirit and spark of festival also gives us access to more truth.
Absolutely. We don't have to, the whole thing, like the old IBM attire, right?
Right.
Blue jacket, red tie, white shirt. Mm-hmm. Got to wear the uniform, got to act this way. Well, if you step out of that line, then you're looked at as, you're probably not going to be around very much longer if you're in that atmosphere. And now that play actually brings us into that state of presence, right? Because we're just acting, whether it's acting out or we're just having fun. So we're in that moment, and it frees up the constriction of wherever our thoughts might have been.
It opens us. Yeah.
So what we're coming to the end of our time for now. What can you offer in a way of a daily practice for folks that can help them to find this place in themselves and connect in greater ways with the natural reality that exists?
The two things I frequently offer as suggestions are the first one that I've mentioned already: pay attention to your language and see what more comes into view and seems possible when you switch from mechanistic metaphors to organic and life-aligned language. And I find that it's relatively easy to do and reveals a lot. It changes a lot. And then
it does. Self-awareness, it's
right.
Oh,
right.
Just another thing I wanted to add, speaking of self-awareness, my wife and I were visiting Tulum a couple of years ago, and there were these signs in the middle of the jungle on the way to Chichen Itza that were in English. One said, "Observe your intentions," and the other, "Observe your distractions." And we'd been talking about self-awareness the entire morning, and here we go, right? We come across these signs. So that's kind of another kind of evidence, right?
Yeah, I love that.
Okay, so your second practice.
Second thing is be courageous, take a chance, and have some of these bigger conversations, even if it's just with the trees and with your journal, as I do.
Do something.
Right, but ideally find some others. See who else is interested in exploring this individual and collective practice of tuning into life through play, through beauty and art, through new language, through meditation, through collective meeting technologies like World Cafe, where we're tuning in not to your idea or my idea, but what's in the space between us, what's emerging in the space between us. And these are straightforward methods of being together, but they reveal life's wisdom and intention. So find others who want to be in that practice and exploration. Tend to the relationships and ask more of them. See if your work together can be a practice ground of generative relationship and deeper belonging. And this is a tricky one. There's a practice of discernment. As you're tuning into what's needed in the world, and as you're trying to figure out what's yours to contribute, there will be people always ready to tell you what you're sensing is not true.
Absolutely. And that's probably, that has been more common than not.
Yeah. And very often what they're saying is what they need to hear, not necessarily what you need to hear.
Absolutely. And that's Psych 101.
Right.
Right.
So there's such discernment that's needed. It's really tricky, but that's core to the practice. And figuring out what's the bigger wisdom and what's the healing that's needed that I can contribute to. What is my gift, and how do I navigate that space between?
So when you're telling someone how they need to be, you really listen to your words.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's about you.
Right.
Not about them.
Sometimes it's you channel something. Sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. And there are sometimes that's true. But for the most part, when it comes from that place of resistance or disconnection or attempting even codependent relationships, right, where you're wanting to be something for someone else, that's another aspect of that. But yeah, you're right. Just pay attention. Just pay attention.
Right. Exactly. And figure out what is your practice for paying attention. Is it the trees? Is it the journal? Is it prayer and meditation? What will support you in paying attention?
Could be music, could be reading, whatever.
Time in nature. Yeah.
Michelle, this has just been an absolutely wonderful conversation. I thank you for joining me today. And I'm sure that the guests our visitors, viewers, however it filters out through the thought-mosphere and the virtual world, will get some benefit out of what they've heard from you and our discussion today. So
Wonderful.
thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much, Zen.
And thank you for watching One World in a New World. Namaste and in la catch. Once again, I'm Zen Benefiel, and hopefully we'll see you again next time. Thanks so much for viewing. Bye for now.